inspired by the combat service of my father. When the opportunity arose as a B-52 pilot to go overseas, I put my name in the hat.
We're local and educational. You're watching WLAE-TV, celebrating 40 years of New Orleans public television.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villeries Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villeries provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villeries Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969.
Dave Miette Insurance Agency. Auto, home, flood, business, 504-556-0809. Dave Miette, INSagency.com.
C&C Drugs is a family-owned pharmacy that's been serving Southeast Louisiana for over 50 years. Whether you need help taking care of an elderly family member, a growing child, or even a pet, C&C provides patient-centered care for your entire family. C&C Drugs, large enough to serve you, small enough to know you. Locations in Mandeville and Araby.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to introduce you and talk about the life and times of one of the most accomplished journalists in the history of sports here in New Orleans. Bernard Fernandez joins us on the program. De La Salle Hall of Famer, a guy that, again, worked with Pete Finney. He is known, again, around the world for his writing in terms of boxing, multiple Hall of Fames in terms of boxing as well. And, of course, we're so happy to have him on our program here today. Bernard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eric.
First of all, native New Orleanian, right?
Yep.
Native New Orleanian, grew up, went to Carrollton, St. Stephen's, is that right?
No, St. Stephen on Napoleon Avenue.
Napoleon Avenue. Grew up uptown?
Yes.
Grew up uptown?
Uptown boy.
Uptown myself as well. And of course, again, ended up at De La Salle.
Yes.
In which you were just recently inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that was nice.
It was very nice. Let's start off with, again, some of the things that you've been involved in. First, I want to show, again, not only is, again, Bernard an incredible journalist, but also an accomplished author. This is just 2 of the 5 books that he's written. Again, championship rounds 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, recapping all the great bouts in boxing. Also, again, been inducted into 4 Boxing Hall of Fames as well, is right?
Yeah, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Atlantic City, and the big one a couple years ago was the International Boxing Hall of Fame.
Right. And before we get into that, talk a bit about that, because again, not 1, but 4 Boxing Hall of Fames, and of course, again, the big one.
Well, you know, the thing is, when you start in the profession that I did, you do it for the work. You know, you love the work. You have enthusiasm when you get a good story. You want to tell it. You want to tell it as well as you can. And if you do it long enough, somewhere along the line, you're going to get some recognition.
Yes.
I never thought about Halls of Fame, but in 2005, I got a call that I was going to be inducted into the Pennsylvania Boxing Hall of Fame, which kind of made sense because boxing is very big in Philadelphia.
Yes.
And, you know, and I'd been at the Philadelphia Daily News for a long time covering, you know, big fights all over the country and the world, you know. And then 2013, New Jersey Boxing Hall of Fame, 2018, the Atlantic City Boxing Hall of Fame. I was formally in the class of 2020 for the National Boxing Hall of Fame, but COVID kind of took care of that.
Right.
Also 2021. They had a big triple induction class in 2022, which I did not attend because my wife was dealing with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and I chose not to go. But the following year, 2023, she felt well enough that she could actually go, and she was there with my grandson, and I was sitting on the stage between Michael Spinks and Riddick Bowe, and Jimmy Lennon, Jr., the ring announcer, for Showtime Championship Boxing. The first person he called up to speak was me, and I had nothing prepared. Right. And people knew that, that my wife had been ill, and so I went up there and I said whatever came into my mind. And a lot of people knew what my wife was dealing with. Yes. And her most recent PET scan had come back and the cancer had not progressed. So I told her, I said, I'll say something that anyone who knows boxing can appreciate. My wife's PET scan, most recent PET scan, came back clean, cancer hadn't progressed, and she's kicking cancer's ass. So, well, that got a, standing ovation, yes. More for her than for me. And, but I did not anticipate the De La Salle thing. Yes. But Miles Sagers, Dr. Miles Sagers, I think put my name in nomination. Right. And I got a call from John Charles, the athletic director at De La Salle, telling me that I was going in. So I said, well, that's, I highly value the 4 years that I spent at De La Salle, yes. because the vision that kind of came into fuzzy focus at St. Stephen with winning that essay contest, citywide essay contest.
Talk about that contest, if you would.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was for 8th grade students at Catholic schools, and there were a lot more Catholic schools in New Orleans then. Yes. But I did the essay, and it got sent in, I guess, to the Archdiocese or whoever the judging panel was. And a few weeks later, I showed up for school, and they were having an assembly in the yard. What's this about, and Sister Camilla, the principal and the 8th grade boys teacher, she said that I had won the citywide essay contest. And she took me aside and she said, you should seriously consider writing as a profession. Well, she put the idea in my head, and when I went to De La Salle, I joined the newspaper staff, the yearbook staff, and I, 2 Christian brothers, Brother Gerard and Brother Justin, both recommended that I consider, writing as a profession. And I said, well, now I was like Elwood Blues. I had 2 Christian brothers and a daughter of charity recommending this. So now I was on a mission from God, and I had spent the summer between my junior and senior year of high school as the sports department copy boy, and talking to Peter Finney and picking his brain, and also Will Peneghy and George Sweeney. It was like a journalism seminar.
Who's who?
Yeah. Yeah. And then what happened was, with my then pregnant wife, who was pregnant with our first child, there was an opening for a sports writer at the Houma Courier, and I said, well, that's pretty close. And I went over there, and I interviewed for what seemed like a really long time, and I didn't know what that meant. And John Gordon, the publisher, and the owner and publisher Ray Dill, they went off, and they came back and said, we don't think that we want you to be a sports writer would you be interested in being sports editor? I was a month short of my 22nd birthday.
That's how old are you? Yeah. Right.
I mean, this was August, and I was going to turn 22 in September, and I said, okay. And I said, do they know what they're getting into? But that first year, the Houma Courier got the top award for its circulation category from the Louisiana Press Association, and I won my first 2 writing awards for newspaper work. So
amazing.
And from then,
and then from there again, you worked in Mississippi, right? The Jackson Clarion Herald, right?
Well, actually, it was the Jackson Daily News, which is now defunct. But at first, I was at the Miami Herald. Okay. And where you had to do like 3 or 4 years of an apprenticeship, on a copy desk, and I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to write. I didn't want to write headlines. So when I found out there was an opening in Jackson, Southeastern Conference sports.
Yes.
So I went there and I spent 10 years as a columnist and covering SEC sports, primarily Ole Miss.
Right.
Which is why both of my sons wound up going to Ole Miss. If somebody had told me when I was 12 years old, listening to Billy Cannon's 89-yard punt return against Ole Miss, that I would eventually have two sons that went to Ole Miss, I would have said, nah, that'll never happen. But life takes funny turns sometimes.
And then from there, Philadelphia Daily News?
I went to
another stop.
No, I went to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
Okay.
Because I had those APSE awards.
Yes.
And the executive sports editor was a micromanager who basically told the writers how to write their stories, and I didn't like that. And I was in Jacksonville, Florida, covering the Pittsburgh Maulers, an expansion team in the USFL. And I was complaining to Ron Cook, who was with the other Pittsburgh paper. I said, I should have gone to one of those other papers where I had a chance to. And Paul Domowitch, who later became a longtime colleague of mine with the Philadelphia Daily News, he says, we have an opening in our paper. Why don't you send some clips to Mike Ratha, the executive sports editor? Well, the Philadelphia Daily News had the best sports section and the best sports staff in the country. It was like sports writer heaven. So I sent some clips to Mike Ratha, and I flew to Philadelphia. It was only a 45-minute flight. And I said, how many people are you looking at for this position? And he said, we're not looking at anybody. We got your clips. You're the guy we want. And I said, I want you right back. And that's how I wound up in Philadelphia for the last 28 years of my newspaper career.
Right. And that was 1984?
Yes.
So from 84 to
2012.
2012. Amazing. Now, again, also have written for Ring Magazine.
Yes.
Right? I've been on ringtv.com, thesweetscience.com, maxboxing.com, suredog.com. We talked about the 5 books. Let's start back
at 3 movies too.
And 3 movies. That's right. With one with the talking.
I had because it was Rocky Balboa, the 2006 one.
Yes.
And Sylvester Stallone played Rocky Balboa, a Philadelphia fighter. I was supposed to be in Rocky V, but I couldn't be in it because when they shot those scenes, I was in Tokyo covering the Tyson Douglas fight. Okay. So when it came out that he was going to do another Rocky movie, I did a facetious column for one of the boxing websites, Sly You Owe Me. It was all in jest.
Yes.
And a few days later, I got a phone call from some woman with a casting agency in Los Angeles. She said, Sly saw your story. He would like you to be in his movie. She said, we would have contacted you earlier, but we didn't have a number for your agent. I said, I don't have an agent. I have a wife, and she takes 100%. Right. So that's how that happened.
Amazing. And of course, again, 3 movies, right? So which ones were they?
Play It to the Bone with Antonio Banderas and Woody
Harrelson.
Woody Harrelson, yeah.
Right.
And Real Steel, which was about boxing robots, but hey, it was a movie.
Yes. And then, of course.
And then Rocky Balboa.
Rocky Balboa.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning and working as an intern under Pete Finney at the Picayune. Talk a bit about that.
Well, I think everybody who is a sports fan, look, people like Jerry Eisenberg and John Shule, national sports writers in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, they all said Peter Finney was as good a sports writer as there was anywhere in the country. Yes. And if he had wanted to go to New York or Chicago or Los Angeles, he probably could have. But he was a New Orleans guy through and through, as his son is now as the editor of the Clarion Herald. Yes. And he never wanted to go anywhere but New Orleans. So, when I got that position as the sports department copy boy, whenever I had a chance, I would pick his brain, and George Sweeney, who is the Tulane beat writer, Will Penicky, Ed Staten, Pete Barriquet, and it was like, it was better than studying journalism at LSU, because it was like real, it was the real thing. and that's where I got some of my first newspaper bylines covering American Legion baseball that summer. And from there was just.
And how old?
Back then, I was 16.
16.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Peter Finney started writing for New Orleans newspapers when he was 16, and a Jesuit. Yeah. So
that's amazing. Son of a law enforcement officer, right? Come from a law enforcement family? Yeah,
my father was a captain. Well, my father, and first of all, with my interest in boxing, my father was a Navy veteran of World War II in the Pacific. He was a professional boxer, a welterweight for a time, and my mother, after a while, she did not want him doing that. She didn't want him getting hurt, so he went and joined the police force where they hit people they could shoot at him or try to stab him. Go figure. But and I had an uncle that was with NOPD. Most of the adult males I knew growing up were NOPD. Law enforcement gene skipped over me, but both of my sons are in law enforcement. My older son, Randall, is a lieutenant with JPSO, and Kevin was a longtime member of the Gretna PD and is now investigator for Jefferson Parish District Attorney Paul Connick.
Right.
And both of their wives are or were with JPSO. And so it skipped the law enforcement. One time I asked my wife, I said, if I had gone into police work, how do you think I would have done? And she looked at me and she said, well, I think as a cop you would have made a good sports writer.
Now, is that where your dad and being a boxer, is that where your love for the sweet science comes from?
Well, I loved my dad. My dad loved boxing. They used to have a thing, Gillette Cavalcade of Sports, on Friday nights.
I remember. Well,
and
I know of it,
and when he was off on Friday nights, I would be in 4th, 5th grade, and I'd be watching it with him.
Right.
And I used to pretend that Florentino Fernandez, who was one of the fighters that fought on Friday night fights, I was somehow related to. My father's favorite fighter was Carmen Basilio, and Hall of Famer, and that's the International Boxing Hall of Fame is in Canastota, New York, which is Carmen Basilio's hometown.
Did not know that.
So the thing is, when I went to Philadelphia, which is a major fight town, and they had a guy, Elmer Smith, who was the boxing writer, but they periodically switched beats around, and when he moved on to another beat, I was in play for the Philadelphia Eagles, which is NFL, top of the food chain, but they were lousy then, and the Philadelphia Flyers, which is hockey, and I was from New Orleans, so what would I be doing covering hockey? So I went to Mike Rathett, our executive sports editor, and I said, who do you have in mind for boxing? He says, I don't know, are you interested in it? I said, yeah. The first fight that I covered officially for the Philadelphia Daily News was Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvin Hagler.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
And then kind of went from there.
From there. You also again covered. You mentioned Ole Miss for the Jackson Clarion Herald. I want to get into that in a moment, but I want to go back to boxing for a moment and New Orleans when you were growing up. New Orleans really, again, I was at the tail end of that when I was growing up. You watch Hab Glaudy on the TV news, Buddy Diliberto, again, etc. New Orleans was a boxing town. New Orleans was a horse racing town. New Orleans was a prep sports town. Tulane, LSU. Long before, again, there was the New Orleans Saints, the Buccaneers, or the Jazz. Talk about that aspect of it and how different it was back then, because boxing and horse racing were really kind of the two big sports,
right? The thing is, I mean, and these names go back a ways, but the leading promoter of boxing in New Orleans then was Leapin' Louis Messina, and later Les Banana.
Right.
And Whitey Esnault was training all those great fighters at his gym in the French Quarter, and. So I was going to fights with my father, alive and in person, and to see Jerry Pellegrini, Percy Pugh.
Yes.
You know, Henry Hank fought so often in New Orleans. He was from Detroit, but I thought he was from New Orleans.
Right.
You know, and Tony Licata, and you know, so that just furthered my ambition to do boxing. Particularly, you know, when I went to Philadelphia and I was you know, at Madison Square Garden a lot, at Atlantic City a lot, Las Vegas, England, South Korea. You know, I mean, if there was a big fight, you know, I was covering it because you know, and they never took me off that beat because they figured they weren't going to get anybody who liked it more or was better at it.
Boxing in New Orleans, some great boxers did. You mentioned just a few coming out of the city of New Orleans, coming out of Louisiana, especially back during that time, right?
Oh yeah, you know, and you know, one of the things is because you remember when they used to have all of the plaques of the people who had been inducted into Greater New Orleans Sports Hall of Fame. That was in the press lounge. Yes. At the Superdome.
Yes.
So I remember one time I was covering something in the Superdome because they always would send me to New Orleans when I had to cover something in my hometown, and I looked around and I looked at all the plaques and I said, Johnny Arthurs isn't in, you know, who was in my '65 graduating class, and you know, it may have been
Tulane, right after that.
Yeah, and was, you know, senior year at Tulane, he averaged 26.5 points a game, and so, you know, I called Peter Finney, you know, and I said, Peter, Johnny Arthurs is not in the New Orleans Greater. He said, oh yeah, he is, isn't he? I said no, and you know, then I talked to whoever, you know, was the sports information director at Tulane then, and he says, yeah, he is, isn't he? I said no, and then so the thing is, you know, the next induction class he was in, and Johnny, you know, thanked me. I said, don't thank me. You got in. That 26.5 points a game. You scored against 40 against LSU when they had Maravich, and you know, and they won. You know, Tulane won by 19 points, and the headline read, as I'm paraphrasing here, Wave beats Tigers. Maravich gets 60, you know, and I said, you know, and he said, I can't win. I got 40 points against LSU at home, and we won, and he gets the lead. I said, well, you know,
it is Maravich.
That was he was Maravich, you know.
Right. Was it always your when you were growing up your favorite sports?
Oh, it was everything. You know, I played everything. You know, I mean, or tried to. You know. I played on a CSL championship team at St. Stephen. Also, you know, played Nordball at Lions Center. Yes. Louisiana Avenue in Chapatoulas.
Know it well.
Yep. and
anybody who grew up in our part of town knows it
well.
You know,
and you know, and I went to De La Salle, but starting like 6th grade, 7th grade, you know, I'd be going to games. So I saw the Pat Screen Blue Jays at Jesuit. Yes. Billy Truex at Holy Cross. Right. Don Gonalda at Redemptorist. And then, you know, with De La Salle, with Johnny Altobello, you know, they were always winning state championships in basketball and baseball, you know. So, you know, the thing is that when it came time to pick a high school, you know, several of my friends from St. Stephen were going to go to De La Salle. You know, and so I just figured, well, you know, I played on the city championship CSAL team, and so I went there, and you know, they had tryouts, and they had like 60 guys there, and they played 3-on-3 for about 5 minutes, and you know, and then then they said, okay, this one, and I wasn't one of the ones, you know, and that very disappointed me, you know, but because I had kind of tentative offers at Holy Cross and Redemptorist, you know, but now I wanted to go to De La Salle. You know.
And of course, from there, obviously, again, being involved in the yearbook, being involved in the school newspaper, obviously, again, sets you up again for your future endeavors, obviously, as being a professional sports writer.
Yeah, and you know, the thing is, if I recall this correctly, because it's been a long time, I think the Louisiana Press Association named the Cavalier, the school newspaper, At one point, it was first in the state. The Maroon Legend at one point was first in the state. And we had several other 65 graduates that were, inclined to go in the same profession. Ed Anderson covered state government for the Times-Picayune for many years.
Right.
Errol Laborde, with Gambit and New Orleans Magazine, he was there. Jim Farwell, is a published author. Brian Altabella is a World War II historian. He's had books published. So, and then Joe Julovitz, who, believe it or not, did not join the school paper or yearbook. He was the outdoor writer for the Florida Times-Union, covering hunting and fishing and going on deep sea fishing.
Right.
Pretty good gig if you're into that.
Yeah. So incredible. We're going to take a pause here. We're going to hear from our underwriters. We come back. We're going to talk about Bernard Fernandez's, what he's covered in his career, some of the great fights he's covered in his career. We'll talk about, again, the boxing. Also, again, not just boxing. Covered, obviously, Ole Miss. Covered, again, LSU with their 2 national championships here at the Dome. So a lot to cover in our second segment. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Bernard Fernandez is our guest. I'm your host, Eric Asher. We'll be right back.
Yeah. And I did Penn State.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
I'm Eric Asher. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guest today is Bernard Fernandez, again, Hall of Fame sports writer, Philadelphia Daily News, Ring Magazine, and of course, formerly with the Times-Picayune, Homer Courier. All that we spoke about in our first segment. Now we want to get into the meat of, again, some of the things that Bernard has covered in his career. Boxing. Some of the great fights that you have covered and maybe some of the more memorable fights that, again, that you've covered in your career.
Well, probably the biggest fight was the biggest upset ever in boxing. When Buster Douglas, as a 42-1 underdog, beat Mike Tyson by knockout, which nobody saw coming. But there were factors that played into that. Buster Douglas' mother had died, and he dedicated the fight to his mother, and he trained as he had never trained before. The guy always had talent. And Mike Tyson figured, I'm just going to walk out there and he's going to collapse in fear and I'll win. And he didn't train as hard as he should have, and but as I was there and I was at ringside because the way that our paper approached boxing was the same way it approached everything else. We cover the NBA Finals, even if the 76ers weren't in it. And we covered the World Series, whether we had the Phillies in it or not. And, in boxing, we covered superstars, and Mike Tyson was a superstar, and I remember one time Angelo Dundee had told me about Muhammad Ali. He said, if Muhammad was fighting on the dark side of the moon, sports writers would charter rocket ships to go to the dark side of the moon. And the closest thing to Muhammad Ali to have come along in a long time was Mike Tyson. So when Mike Tyson fought, we went there. And even if it was a one-round blowout, but the Clarion Ledger, which was the other, not the Philadelphia Inquirer, which was the other Philadelphia paper, their beat guy said, oh, why are you going, you're spending all the money to go to Tokyo, and and it's going to be over in 1 or 2 rounds. Right. And I said, hey, it's Mike Tyson. We you know, it's the same thing with the golf rider. He went where Tiger Woods was playing in a major. You know,
right.
And so I went there. It was the biggest upset in boxing history. They tried to have something with a long controversy and give it back to Tyson or something like that, and it was a big controversy. And I'm there. I'm there in Tokyo. I'm right there in the same hotel, you know. And meanwhile, the guy from, you know, the Inquirer was trying to do it by telephone from 14 time zones away.
Right.
And I said, God, I really like that.
Right.
You know, because you want to win. You want to beat your competitors.
Right. You want to win. No doubt about it. That was one of the biggest upsets in the history of boxing.
Oh yeah, in the history of anything in sports. Right. And I think about 6 weeks later, I was in Las Vegas to cover the first Julio Cesar Chavez Meldrick Taylor fight, when the fight was stopped with Meldrick Taylor ahead on the scorecards with 2 seconds to go in the 12th and final round.
Yeah.
You know, that was another big story. And then the first fight I had actually covered for the Philadelphia Daily News was Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler. Right. And I did cover some fights with Tommy Hearns and with Ray Leonard. And you know, actually Marvin's last fight was the one with Leonard, you know, that he lost. He never believed that he did lose it. But you know, Oscar De La Hoya and you know, all the big fighters. Right. You know, I mean, we went to them. You know, and I remember after I had gone to Tokyo and covered that fight, I wanted to go to London to cover Lennox Lewis. Okay. In one of the fights that he was having, but he was appearing. He was doing sequences for a movie, you know, and he wasn't really training, and he figured he would. That. Yeah. And so I went to Rath and I said, I think we need to go to London for that fight. And he said, you know, why do you think we ought to go to that fight? I said, Tokyo. Remember what happened in Tokyo? I think the same thing could happen. And Lennox Lewis got knocked out. Yeah. And you know, after that, he basically just said, tell me where you're going to be. Right. You know, I had a, you know, open checkbook, you know, or to pick the fights that I think we needed to cover.
You know, in 1984, going to Philadelphia, boxing town, and if I remember correctly, that was the year, was that the Olympics in Los Angeles, where again, the United States had an incredible boxing team, am I right? Yeah. Yeah. Was Meldrick Taylor on that team?
Meldrick Taylor won a gold medal. Right. Pernell Whitaker won a gold medal. Yes.
Holyfield
got
beat, right?
Yeah. Well,
it wasn't a controversial.
No. It was. He actually knocked the guy out. Okay. The guy from New Zealand. Right. But as the punch was this far from the guy's chin, the referee said, "Halt!" You know.
Yes. It was controversial.
And then he knocked him out with the punch. He was out for like 2 minutes, and then it was a Bulgarian referee, you know, and I don't know what he was thinking, but you know, they disqualified Evander Holyfield, you know, and you know, so he didn't get a gold medal. That team won 9 gold medals, but you have to remember, there's a big debate over whether the 1984 or the 1976 U.S. Olympic team was the best. Right. The 1976 U.S. Olympic team that had the Spinks brothers, you know, and Ray Leonard, you know, and Howard Davis. They were competing against the East Germans, the Russians, you know, and who am I thinking about? You know, all the Eastern European countries, and also Cubans.
Oh, right, the Cubans,
and the boycott in '84, all those countries didn't go. They won 9 gold medals and a silver and a bronze. You know, it's amazing that Evander Holyfield had to settle for a bronze. You know, but he did okay later as a pro.
How? Yeah, just a bit. How was it? You've covered Hagler, you covered Sugar Ray Leonard. Obviously, again, you talked about Lennox Lewis, Mike Tyson. In your opinion, the greatest boxer you ever covered?
Well, I'm going to fudge a little bit.
Go ahead.
Because you know they had different phases of their careers, but probably the 2 best fighters that I ever covered were Roberto Duran and Sugar Ray Leonard.
Okay. Did you cover that fight? Their fights?
No,
together?
I mean, well, yeah, I did. I did the third fight.
Third fight?
But
That wasn't the one in New Orleans,
no,
was it?
the one in '84
was
when Elmer Smith was
yes.
the beat writer.
Okay.
The one, and he also was the one in New Orleans. But.
That was the famous No Mas fight.
Yeah, and Roberto Duran had, he caught so much flack. He thought, that it would be worse to get knocked out than to simply quit. But one of my fellow writers for the Baltimore Sun, he put, after that fight, he wrote, and it really hurt Roberto Duran. He said they're checking Roberto Duran's birth certificate. They think now he may be actually from Guatemala, and he had to work pretty hard. He fought for like 35 years, and and then he won that the middleweight title, from Iran Barkley, and redeemed a lot of
Yes.
So I mean the thing is now when he goes to Canastota or whatever, and he goes into where they're doing signings and everything. I was at a table, was signing books and something, and then somebody said, Roberto Duran is now at the head table, and everybody who was at all the other tables just lined up to get his, because he was, when he was at his best, he was the greatest lightweight I ever saw.
I swear, I'm telling you, hands of stone, right?
Yep, but I wrote for a story that I did on him. I said he embodied all that was barbaric and beautiful in boxing.
Yeah. Talk about the great Marvin Hagler.
Marvin Hagler, I think you can make a pretty strong case that he was the best middleweight ever.
Yes.
Now, Sugar Ray Robinson won middleweight title 4 times. But everybody would say that he was at his best as welterweight. He was a little past his prime for all those fights, but he was still, one of the all-time great middleweights. But he wasn't the very best middleweight. I think, from what I know of the sport, I think that Marvin Hagler probably was the greatest middleweight ever. And I say that. Having covered just about all of Bernard Hopkins' fights.
Right.
Bernard Hopkins is a physical anomaly. He was still world rated at 52 years of age.
Crazy.
Which is amazing, because he never, for 20-something years, 25 years, he never ate a donut. He was...
He never had a Mackenzie's donut.
Yeah, or, true, but he was fanatical about staying in shape,
right,
and his nutrition and so on and so forth. So he was able to compete at a high level until his late 40s and early 50s, which was just unheard of. Even George Foreman said, what I did in my 40s was pretty unreal. He says, but Bernard Hopkins is another creature. He's from he's from another planet.
Yeah. You have a relationship with George Foreman.
Yes.
Right? Talk a little bit about him and his career.
Well, the thing is, when I started going in boxing, George Foreman was coming back after 10 years of retirement, and he had, he needed money because he had his church that he needed to finance, and he had gained a lot of weight, and he was doing the commercials for the grillers. I had 2 of them, by the way. And when he started his comeback, everybody just said, this is a joke. And then he started knocking people out.
Right.
Well, he was knocking some stiffs out, which he was supposed to do. Right. But then he fought Jerry Cooney in Atlantic City. And I was there, and Jerry Cooney was no joke. Jerry Cooney probably had, next to Joe Frazier, the best left hook of any heavyweight I've ever covered. And I actually picked Jerry Cooney to win that fight. And then George knocked him out in the second round, and that was, it was the last fight for Jerry Cooney.
Right.
his only losses, when you stop and think about it, Jerry Cooney ought to be in the International Boxing Hall of Fame.
He's not?
No, he's not. But his only losses were, to
Ali?
no, well, no, not to Ali, to
Okay.
Larry Holmes,
Okay.
Michael Spinks,
Okay.
and Jerry Cooney.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's
pretty good lineup.
No doubt, no doubt. In your opinion, the greatest heavyweight of all time?
Actually, I did an online debate with Tom Hauser, who's another boxing author. And it was like, who was the greatest heavyweight of all time, Joe Louis or Muhammad Ali? And so this was for a college journalism class. And Tom Hauser had done a book on Ali, The Life and Times of Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
So he says, I'll take Ali. Well, I said, well, if I have to be, the debate guy for Joe Louis, I can make a pretty good case for him too. And so, we did our thing, and point counterpoint. And when the class had to vote on, and Muhammad Ali beat Joe Louis by 1 vote.
Right.
And I said, well, if I got Joe Louis that close, I must have done a good job.
Really good
but I would say the Muhammad Ali prior to his taking 3 years off, for not going into being inducted into the Army, that was probably as good as you're ever going to see.
Where's Mike Tyson in hierarchy, in your opinion?
Mike Tyson was great when he was great, but he took shortcuts later on, didn't train like he was supposed to, bought into his own theory of invincibility, and it cost him. Bert Sugar, the great boxing historian, had him something like 7th or 8th, not on all-time great heavyweights, but like among heavyweights, which might be a little low. But his prime wasn't all that it might have been. And I think you can say that about some baseball players and some football players and stuff like that. You only have so many years that you're at the top of your game.
Yeah.
And I just mentioned Jerry Cooney. He's not in the International Boxing Hall of Fame, but his body of work, deserves it. And Mike Tyson, was he the 8th best heavyweight of all time, or the 6th best punching heavyweight of all time? Some people had George Foreman ahead of him, or Joe Louis, or Ernie Shavers, certainly. But it's like anything. When you make a list, your top 10 this or something like that, it's good for debate. And people will talk it over. And they'll sit down at a couple of bar stools and have a beer and argue and stuff like that. And that's great. It keeps the sport alive in people's minds.
The Spinks brothers, talk about their legacy, talk about, again, because you covered them as well, right?
Yes. Leon was probably another one of those guys that should have been better than what he was. He beat Muhammad Ali in only his 7th professional fight. And all of a sudden, people were throwing money at him, but he was a street guy from St. Louis. And even for the fight in New Orleans, once his people got to New Orleans, they didn't know where he was. He was in in the black neighborhoods, shooting pool and whatever, and they didn't know where he was. Michael, on the other hand, was more like Bernard Hopkins. He was dedicated to his craft, and so he went further. And he will always be regarded as the better of the two brothers. But Michael said that when he and Leon were growing up, and when started to get into boxing, he said they used to spar one another. He said, Leon beat the hell out of me every time. He said, but one time we were going along, we saw a gym, and we went inside the gym and we found a couple pairs of gloves, and we went at it, and it was the first time I ever got the better of him. And I threw the gloves down and said, that's it, I'm never going to fight you again. I'm never going to spar with you again. He said, I got the better of Leon. to him, that was as good as beating Larry Holmes or Jerry Cooney.
Now, my memory, see if it serves me correctly. Michael Spink stepped up in weight class, didn't he?
Yeah.
And light heavyweight, was it, or heavyweight?
No, he was a light heavyweight.
Right.
He was a light heavyweight
right.
champion. And what happened was, light heavyweights were getting, like for title defenses, like $100,000, $125,000. Heavyweight champions were making millions.
Yes.
And so Butch Lewis was the promoter for Michael Spinks, and he said, I want you to move up and fight Larry Holmes. And Michael said, he's too big, He says, no, I have an idea. There's this guy in New Orleans named Mackie Shilstone, and he has some innovative ideas how you can put the weight on and not lose any quickness and speed and so on and so forth. And I knew Mackie very well.
Right.
I haven't talked to him in a while, but so Mackie could take weight off of fighters like Riddick Bowe, who were a little chunky, and he put it on the right way with Michael Spinks. And he had the 2 victories over Larry Holmes. Larry disputes them both,
Yes.
But, and the thing is that all of a sudden Mackie Shilstone was one of the hottest flavors in boxing.
A go-to guy, right?
Yeah.
In terms of training, right?
He worked with the Williams sisters in tennis. He worked with the San Francisco Giants in baseball.
Yes.
With Ozzie Smith and everybody wanted to work with him because he made nutrition trendy.
Yeah.
He worked to put weight on to Bernard Hopkins when he moved up to light heavyweight, and you couldn't tell any difference between him at middleweight and light heavyweight.
Right.
He skipped over, super middleweight, so Mackie has a place in boxing history.
Yeah. In your time covering boxing, the greatest, I don't know if I want to say the great, talk about the top trainers in the game. And maybe again, who you believe is the greatest ever.
Oh, Eddie Futch would certainly be there. Angelo Dundee didn't always start at the beginning of training camp. He was a motivator.
Okay.
Like with the first Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns fight, when he was losing. He was losing a fight. And Angelo said, "You're blowing it, son," and that's set off something in Ray, and he went out and won a fight. Yeah. Angelo was probably the best motivator. He would go to Canastota for the International Boxing Hall of Fame inductions, and people would just flock to him like he was, I don't know, like the Pied Piper, because he could talk to somebody for a minute, 2 minutes, and make them feel like they were the most important person in the world, and he had a gift,
Right.
And Customato was a great trainer.
Yes.
He trained, Mike Tyson, and before him he had Floyd Patterson and Jose Torres, the light heavyweight champion. A lot of people, I campaigned. I hate to say that because I don't like campaigning, but I campaigned with the International Boxing Hall of Fame to have Whitey Esnault inducted into the Greater New Orleans, the International Boxing Hall of Fame, and they eventually did. And they could not find any of his relatives to give the plaque to.
Yes.
So they called me up and asked me to accept for him.
Right.
And I've had a little bit of success, forwarding the candidacies of people.
That's awesome.
Johnny Arthur should have been in the Hall of Fame years before. Linda Tuero, I had a hand in maybe bringing her name up.
Yeah.
Excuse me, and also Les Banana. I had tried very hard to get Percy Pugh inducted into Greater New Orleans Sports Hall of Fame because I thought he deserved it. But people looked at his record. He didn't have very many knockouts. He was not a puncher, and he stayed around too long, like a lot of them do. I think like out of his last 15, 18 fights, he might have lost like 12, 14 of them because he was fighting you know, to get a payday. And you look at his record and you say, well, his record's not that good, but he was really good. He beat Jerry Pellegrini twice, you know.
Right.
And I personally still think, and I don't know if anybody who's going to see this, but I still think he should be given serious consideration for the Greater New Orleans Sports Hall of Fame.
Promotion is such a big part of boxing. Some of the guys you consider the greatest promoters in boxing?
Well, the two guys who were like, you know, Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson, were always at war with one another, were Bob Arum and Don King.
Yes.
And they were 180 degrees removed, given their background. You know, Bob Arum was a Harvard man. He was in the Kennedy administration, you know, in the Department of Justice. Don King, you know, spent time, you know, on a manslaughter rap. You know, he was a street guy, numbers runner in Cleveland. But they both had the street smarts to work in the sometimes sordid world of boxing. And when it made sense financially for them to work with one another, they did. You know, they may not have liked it, you know, and you know, as Don King used to say, and I don't know if I can still mimic him. He said, Bob Arum had the complexion for the connection, you know, and stuff like that, and you know, and Arum would be fuming or something like that, but they were both working the same promotion, which was Zab Judah versus Floyd Mayweather, you know, and so when it made sense, you know, but they went at things differently. Bob Arum had an organization, and he had people at various executive positions, and then they would handle this and this and this. Don King was seat of his pants. His PR guy, you know, he'd get a phone call and saying at 3 in the morning, saying, you're on the 7 o'clock flight to wherever, you know, and it was all in his head, you know, and Bob Arum's got Todd DeBuff, you know, ready to succeed him whenever he passes away. Don King's stepson, Carl King, theoretically would be in the same position, except that Don King was never going to turn anything over to him or anyone else. It was always going to be his show or not. And when he's gone, that's a true American original that won't be replicated.
No doubt. I want to ask you before we close today, we've seen the rise of MMA. With that, maybe again a little bit of a de-emphasis on boxing. Are you seeing that? Do you buy that? Is boxing still as strong as it's always been? Has MMA taken a little bit of the luster away from boxing?
I think the thing that probably hurt boxing more than anything was pay-per-view.
Okay.
I mean, fights that used to be on regular TV, including Muhammad Ali and Larry Holmes.
ABC Wide World of Sports, right?
Yeah, and you know, the thing is now, these fighters, there are a lot of fighters that think that they need, you know, they get offered $20 million for the fight. They say, I can't accept those slave wages, you know. I mean, they think that, you know, they see Floyd Mayweather get, you know, what he got for the fight with Manny Pacquiao, and they think, yeah, I want $100 million. Well, yeah, it's not going to happen. And maybe you might get a couple million pay-per-view buys, but you're not getting 20 million people seeing the fight. How many people saw the first Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran fight? Millions and millions. You know, I mean, it was on, you know, it was on national television. You know, and so I think that's hurt more than anything. Now, MMA, they had 2 MMA cards. UFC in Philadelphia. Yes. So I was assigned to work them, and I did. You know, I mean, and I went but I'm a boxing guy. Yeah. You know, from the get-go. Yes. And you know, you have people who are influencers. You know, like Logan Paul and you know, and his brother. You know, and you know, they're fighting. You know, like retired NBA players and stuff like that, and they, you know, they get a lot of buys, you know, on pay-per-view, and it's like, you know, they get real fighters out there. I mean, really great fighters that don't get what these people are getting. And it's like, when I found out that Willie Mays, I interviewed Willie Mays for a story that I did on Mike Schmidt and Richie Ashburn going into the Baseball Hall of Fame the same year. And he was complaining that Richie Ashburn beat him out for the 1957 batting title because he had 12 bunt hits, and I never had any bunt hits. I was, and stuff. And he was a bitter guy. And I said, why is he, you think of Willie Mays as the cap flying off and say, hey, kid, and everything. It's because they had backup infielders that were getting more than he ever got.
Right.
And he had invested in some business ventures that didn't work. He had a couple of divorces, and and he was not happy. That he wished that he had come along 20 years later.
Yeah.
And because the money spoils everything. I mean, I hate to say that. I mean, you want to get everything that you can get.
Sure.
But I think sometimes people lose sight of what they have.
Yeah.
When you're making $20 million for a fight, you don't say that it's slave wages.
No.
I mean, you don't. Not when people are paying $100 to get your pay-per-view.
Do you think that we will see a resurgence in boxing once again?
You need another superstar to come along. The thing is that there was Jack Dempsey, and later on there was Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano, Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes. Well, I'm not sure if he rises to the level of Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson.
Right.
If the next Mike Tyson comes along, people will jump right back in it.
Right.
I mean, they'll, you have to have a superstar, whether it's Tiger Woods in golf or whoever in tennis.
Right.
I'm always a Jimmy Connors guy.
Right.
But those are the guys that bring eyeballs to the event and to the TV.
Yeah, I got about 50 seconds left. Is boxing more now, boxers coming more from again, outside America than inside of America? And if so, why? I've got 45 seconds or so.
Well, the thing is, Angelo Dundee said, the great heavyweights that would have been great heavyweights, they're not playing football and basketball.
Right.
Right. And they're not getting put. They don't have to go in 4-rounders, like in dingy gyms to start out.
Right.
And and that's the reality.
And it's true, because again, a lot of athletes that would have been in boxing now are going into again, professional sports, football, basketball, etc. Bernard, this has been an absolute a joy for me to have you on this program. Thank you so much for joining us. Bernard Fernandez, again, Boxing Hall of Famer, author of, again, 5 books, also, again, in the De La Salle Hall of Fame, also, again, one of the, again, most accomplished journalists to ever come out of New Orleans. Thanks so much for your time today.
Much.
Certainly appreciate it. All right, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, again, there's so many ways to catch our program now. There's a QR code on your screen that will take you, again, to the WLAE-TV YouTube channel, also to my website, ericasher.com. Remember, we're on Pelican Sports Television, also WLAE, WLAE-TV 2. Pick your network, and of course, make sure you, again, set your DVR and you'll never miss the program. Also, you can catch me on the radio, 106.1 The Ticket. You can listen live at ericasher.com. Also, the Ticket now has an app. It's 106.1 The Ticket app. It's a favorite app store. Anchor Spotify is the home base for our podcast, but our podcast on all podcasting platforms. Just search Inside New Orleans Show with Eric Asher. And of course, we want to thank the underwriters who make the show possible. Each and every one of those underwriters, thank you again for your support of our program. Please support our underwriters, and of course, our fantastic crew here at WLAE-TV who produce our program each and every week. Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Alex Chacon, Thomas Healy, and of course, the best director on the planet, William Hill. For Bernard Fernandez, I'm Eric Asher. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.
Hey, Louisiana. How are you stopping litter? In Terrebonne Parish, we put our trash in a bag.
And never out the window.
In Bienville, we bag it, tie it, and put a lid on it.
We keep litter out of our lakes in Lafayette.
And in Calcasieu Parish, we keep our truck beds clean.
And we secure our loads.
We need every person in every parish to stop littering and let Louisiana shine.
We're local and educational. You're watching WLAE-TV, celebrating 40 years of New Orleans public television.